Welcome to Grand Rounds. It's a special treat to introduce one of my favorite internists here at Georgetown, Varun Sharma. Varun is just one of these critical faculty members in general internal medicine and across the board, not just because of his expertise and knowledge in clinical medicine, but also he brings another dimension to the education of our learners. And his background is in internal medicine, as well as doing a fellowship at Mayo in complementary medicine. So those are the residents and faculty that work with him in clinic just really love to hang around this guy and hear his quirky little comments about so many different things. But I think today's topic typifies a little bit of what Varun Sharma is all about, and how we try to restore happiness and restore some of the principles of internal medicine into our learners. And so I'm very interested in hearing what he has to say. And Varun, welcome. And you now have the floor.
All right. Well, thank you, Murph. Thank you for those kind words. This is probably a little different talk than most Grand Rounds, but we actually had a cancellation last week, and that's why I stepped up to give this talk. But this talk, I actually been working on it for about a year prior to this. And, some of the pandemic inspired me to do this. I just feel things have been kind of down just all around. But actually, I give another talk on stress reduction, and Dr. Murphy was alluding to the fellowship I did. I trained with a mind-body physician who has a really strong program in stress management and resiliency training. And I was giving the talk to some ACP members, and one of them pointed out that while it was, a fine talk, reducing stress doesn't actually make people happy. It keeps people who are happy from becoming unhappy. And I thought about that for a while. I thought this was kind of, okay, this is what the missing key was to making people happy. And in fact, it wasn't. So that's when I started looking into this. It's a topic that it's so strange. Like, no one teaches this. Like, we don't learn it in elementary school or high school or anywhere. And we spend all of our lives trying to be happy. And we spend so much effort, trying to find this, but most of us are going about it wrong, right? We'll come across like a motivational quote here and there, but you actually need quite a bit of structure if you want to live a happy life, right? So disclosures, I have none, so we'll skip that. And the objectives today, I'm actually going to talk a little bit about how our brain attends to the world, either our past and future or the present moment, and you'll see why that is applicable here. We're going to go into what actually happiness is, and it's actually fairly complex. There's a lot of dimensions to happiness. And then we're going to start to touch upon how to actually cultivate it. And, I'll give away the answer. Chasing happiness will actually not make you happy at all. In fact, you have to cultivate gratitude and meaning and other virtues. A lot of data shows that that's actually how you will obtain happiness. Okay. And this talk actually is a form of psychotherapy. And actually the history of it is fairly interesting. This question of happiness, we're not the first, it's not our generation or century where we started asking this. This goes way back. So the Greeks started it with Stoicism. I don't know if you guys are aware of Stoicism. Everyone knows what, someone who is stoic has a face that they're kind of expressionless. I actually get called stoic quite a bit, so I'm familiar with it. But it's actually a very complex philosophy that actually a lot of Roman philosophers and emperors like Marcus Aurelius, they were actually very large proponents of Stoicism. And basically the thought is you can use reason and logic to make you happy, right? Those things that are negative and that make you unhappy, you can reason that you should avoid those things. And you can see how this has roots into modern like cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT. They also, a big part of this, advocate living a virtuous life, right? So that's how you live a good life, with virtues that will make you happy in chasing that. At basically the same time on the eastern side of the world, in Asia, Buddha was actually probably one of the first psychologists, and he was coming up with his own philosophy. And actually, there's a ton of overlap. A lot of CBT also draws from Buddhist and Taoist philosophy, but instead of using your brain to reason, Buddha wanted you to use habits, make habits of thinking. That way it became effortless, and thinking thoughts that will generally keep you happy. He also went on the opposite end and wanted to address suffering. That's actually where his first thoughts came from. And you'll see both of these interspersed through a lot of the things I'm going to talk about, right? But essentially, the two sides of the same coin, right? Okay, so wellness. This is a wellness talk. I mean, the term gets this term gets thrown around a lot, and kind of loses meaning in doing so. But I think it's important to understand this. To me, it's a balance between stress and happiness, right? And why is that important? Well, both are subjective and both depend. Sorry, guys. Hey, I'll have to call you back. Oh, no. Okay. Both depend on what frame of mind, what time frame your mind is in, right? So here is a model of attention. This is from another philosopher, Descartes, the guy who said, "I think, therefore I am." So this is a stage, right? And this is also called the Cartesian theater. The idea being that somewhere in our brains is a stage, and that's where consciousness is unfolding, right? And on this stage is things we smell, touch, see, hear, and taste. So our sensory world, right? Also on this stage, things that we desire, things that we seeking romance, things that bring us pleasure and happiness, right? These are all part of us. Also on this stage are things that sometimes we worry about, our stressors, right, in our life. And normally this is balanced. We need these things to live a rich, full life. Sometimes our stage, we're no longer in the present moment. We're actually start to live in the future, past, and in our stressors, right? And you can see how this detracts from the richness of our life, right? Going to a neuropsychological model of attention, there's been two networks in the brain that have been discerned maybe in the last 2 decades using fMRI studies that underlie attention, right? The first one is the focus network. So this is the more evolved prefrontal cortex part of the brain, evolved in like concentrating and focus. And there's another network called the default network. And this is a network that our brain defaults into actually when we're doing nothing. This network is governed by the limbic lobe. So if you guys remember the limbic lobe, the center of it is the amygdala, and this structure in the brain is fear driven, right? It responds to stress and fearful stimuli, right? So this network likes to think about stress and think about things that scare us, right? It was adaptive. It helped with survival. The problem is this can get out of whack if we spend too much time in this network. Just as if we spend too much time doing anything, our brain devotes more resources to it. So the default network actually can get very large. And people who are very stressed, they can't focus, they can't do anything else because their mind is constantly wanting to go over things, right? The good news is we know we can actually undo this. And these two networks kind of work at the expense of the other. So by practicing and activating the focus network, we can enlarge it. So examples of the focus network, right? So basically when we're in the present moment, concentrating, actualization, meaning what the Stoics would say, living a fulfilling life, having fulfillment. So, these guys camping or hiking, hopefully the father and mother there aren't thinking about, a project that's due next week or unanswered emails. They're in the moment, right, with their kids. Playing or watching a dramatic sporting event, playing or listening to music, engaging in activities, hanging out with friends. These are all times when you're in the focus network. And you're in this network because time goes by very quickly, right? You're kind of in a state of flow. The default network, going back to that, on the other hand, is involved in daydreaming, retrieving memories, envisioning the future. These are all good, important things that we need to do, right? The problem becomes the default network, when active too much, becomes involved in ruminative thinking and worry, right? People who are depressed or have dementia, they have very strong default network activity, right? So we want to balance it. So examples of that, say you're doing a task or even just doing nothing or trying to enjoy coffee and your mind starts to wander to the future, right? You're reading a journal article and 2 paragraphs in, you ask yourself, like, what did I just read, right? Because your mind started chattering with you. You have to go back and read it. Praying or meditating, 5-10 seconds in, your mind starts telling you your to-do list comes up, right? That's your default network is actually communicating with you, right? I give this analogy of a computer. So if this computer is running one program, that computer is going to run nicely, right? It's run smoothly. It can switch from tasks easily. If your computer is running several programs at once all the time, it's going to use up your computer's RAM, right? Over time, so switching from tasks is going to get clunky. It's going to have hard time finishing what it's doing. And to say this was a phone and you had a bunch of programs running, overnight, this phone would get hot and burn out, right? And then the battery would die. So that kind of happens with us in a mind-body sense. That's what we think of when our minds are constantly running, our battery is going to be drained, right? The brain is about 3% of our body weight and it uses 25% of our energy. So if we're constantly running in our minds, that's from a mind-body perspective, that's why people who are depressed or anxious or have chronic pain, that's why they're tired. That's why we feel tired. That's why we have trouble concentrating, because we have to calm the brain. We have to calm the mind, right? Okay, so that's attention. I just wanted to cover that. Now we'll kind of get into happiness and resiliency. This is a graph of emotional state. So just take a few seconds to study this. I adapted it from a couple of other graphs I came through in the literature. Essentially, this is on the x-axis. You're looking at feelings, right? You're looking. Can you guys see my mouse?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Good.
Yes.
So you can see negative from 0 to 5 here, and then positive on the right. And then you look at stress or stimulation over here, right? When we tend to have very negative feelings and there's a lot of stress, that's when we have like anxiety, anger. Over here, still very negative, but maybe less stress or stimulation would be kind of depression, sadness. Over here is more neutral. And then we, on the right side, you get positive and then, content and happy, right? So I bring that up because we're going to talk about psychological resilience. So a lot of psychologists would describe our resilience as a thermostat, right? We have a set point and our brains will kind of move us back and forth depending on what's going on in our life, right? So if our temperature, so today, if your thermostat set to 70 and it's unseasonably warm, you may have to you probably won't need the air conditioning, but your thermostat would put that on. Or if it's too cold, it would put the heating on to bring it back to 70. If you're going through your day and let's say you had to see a patient who showed up 40 minutes late and you're really behind schedule, that may be something that negatively affects you. But within a few minutes, your resilience is going to push you back to your baseline. You're going to kind of deal with it and move on. And likewise, say something really good happens, like a patient brings you lunch or something really nice, and you're going to feel good from that. But eventually, you'll kind of get back to your baseline within a few minutes after that. So that's what our psychological resilience is. So going back to this graph, I try to explain, this is maybe a little difficult, but we have generally, it's accepted that our resilience is about 4 points on this graph, right? So some people may run from like, a little bit negative, like let's say 4 or 5 to about 8 or 9, right? So most days they're running a 7. That's their set point. Some days they can be really happy. They can reach 9, and other days they might have a bad day and they may be 5, right? So this is kind of where this person lives. To me, a person like this has just generally has a sunny disposition. They don't really seem fazed by a lot of things. I actually have a neighbor like this who I couldn't understand for a while until I sort of figured out he must have a really high resilience set point. Um, most people might have something like this where you're more in the middle. You're about a 5. And some days you may feel bummed, you may feel a little bit sad, and other days you may feel like, okay, yes, you can feel extraordinarily happy, but that's not going to last more than a few moments, right? But generally people will run around here. And that's this person. So sometimes they're grumpy and a little mopey, sometimes content and doing well. Then there's some people who just tend to run a little bit on the negative side, right? They tend to be, maybe their baseline is a little bit grumpy. When things are going really bad, they can get very frazzled. They can get very easily stressed and irritable and lash out. And on their best days, they might be just kind of relaxed. They'll never be like super content or happy. And that's okay. That's just how a lot of we are, right? We can all identify certain people like that. The goal of this is to maximize, optimize the time we're spending on this side of the graph, right? Generally we'll be here. My view on that, like if someone is depressed or anxious, it's not that their resilient point is moved over. Their resilience is probably staying the same. They're just pathologically stuck on the very end of their, the negative end of their resiliency bubble there, right? And that's what we have to work to get out. All right, so on to happiness. I really like this quote. I think it sums it up really well, although I don't know what an epigraph is and I don't know who Chesterton was, but I came across this quote. So really the idea is that it's an active process. We have to cultivate it. It's not something that we're just going to slide into, as he says, right? So, well, you'll see exactly what I'm talking about here. Okay, I don't know if I have that chat thing, but I asked this question. Well, say you don't have a gluten intolerance. You're adhering to your diet. Eating one donut, will that make you happy? Okay, I see a nod. Yes. So then you ask the question: will eating, let's say, 5 donuts make you 5 times as happy? Right. I think for a lot of us, the answer is no. But let's say I stomped on your foot, that would make you mad, right? And if I stomped on your foot 5 times, you probably would be 5 times as mad, right? So there's a certain logic to some of our other emotions. Happiness is, you can't really find a logic with it. In fact, our logic kind of fails with happiness. And I think that's why we have so much trouble with it, right? We actually have to understand how we feel happy and why we feel happy. There was a economist who actually won the Nobel Peace Prize. His name was Dan Kahneman. Sorry, this slide is a little out of sorts. And he was studying happiness, and he asked people what was their greatest source of stress in a day, right? Or negative emotions. And overwhelmingly, for those who had kids, it was their children, right? And for those of us who has children, you can see why, right? But he also asked, what was your greatest source of joy? And it was also their children. It was the same answer, right? And that seems very illogical, but it's because of meaning, right? That's how powerful meaning is, and powerful it is into making us achieve happiness, right? So what is happiness? So I'll just give you the definition here. The simplest way to put it is a pleasurable emotional state, right? But it's actually more dynamic than that. So there's hedonistic happiness, right? And that's just a moment of pleasure. That's like eating a donut and then not wanting anymore and just being satisfied. That's hedonistic pleasure. There's another type of pleasure that actually comes from the Stoics. It's called eudaimonia, right? So this is the pleasure of a fulfilled, flourishing life, right? The feeling when you go to the beach, or you're out in nature, or you're just like in the yard with your friends having a great time. They're grilling in the summer, and you go, life is good, right? there's no external stimuli at that moment that gave you that sort of sense of pleasure. It came from within you, right? So that is eudaimonia. And that's actually what the goal of this and the goal of all the philosophers and psychologists is into achieving happiness, right? So we have to understand that. I think there's a lot of confusion about hedonistic and eudaimonia types of happiness. There's also the dimension of wanting of happiness. And this, obviously, it's important to have this, right? Without this, we wouldn't be here. We need to be motivated to do things. And wanting of happiness will bring happiness. But of course, I don't even have to say it. This can get unbalanced and to the extreme cause unhappiness, right? Leads to addiction, leads to suffering when we want more happiness than we can achieve, right? Then we suffer. Okay. All right. So that's the definition of happiness. Now, on top of that, there's different components to happiness, right? So there's a sociologic view of happiness. So basically, happiness is relative, right? Our expectations versus reality. And what do I mean by that? Take this example. Let's say someone makes $50,000 a year, and unexpectedly, they're given a $5,000 raise, right? Maybe their boss is cognizant of inflation or something, right? That person is going to be very happy, especially that it was unexpected, right? On the flip side, say there's someone earning $200,000 at the company, and they're expecting a $15,000 raise, and they also only get $5,000 raise, right? This person, they both get the same amount of money. Objectively, it's the same amount of money. Subjectively, the person who wasn't expecting a raise is much happier, and the person expecting a larger raise and getting a smaller one is probably unhappy, right? So that's what it has to do with, meaning that the objective conditions and subjective reality influence happiness. So that's a sociologic view. To be clear, so they've studied money and happiness, and money does bring happiness. With the caveat, it brings it to a point, right? And you guys may have heard of this. So basically, when your basic life needs are met, and maybe a little bit more, is when happiness will max out, and after that, it plateaus. So the more money you get, it doesn't really affect your happiness after a certain point, right? Interestingly, either does chronic disease. So generally, when people get sick, their happiness goes down until their disease stabilizes. And then their expectations change, and actually their baseline happiness sort of levels out and kind of returns back to the normal resilience point. Obviously, if things are getting worse at any moment, it makes it worse, but it doesn't actually affect on a day-to-day basis people's happiness. And I put showering in the 1500s. One of the writers I was reading on this, Yuval Harari, who wrote a really great book, Sapiens. I highly recommend it. But he's an anthropologist, and he was asking the question about happiness in previous eras, and it's just there's no documentation. People didn't write about it, so we don't know. But he asked the question: in the Middle Ages, people didn't shower, right? It took like 2 months for them to bathe. If we did that today, we'd probably be miserable, right? Every day that you're not showering and you want to, you'd probably just be scratching and feeling gross. But back then, it was just the way of life. It probably didn't affect their day-to-day happiness. And there's no evidence to think that they were any less happy, right? So this goes to the relative nature of happiness. There's also the biologic view, right? So essentially, so regardless, so there's some things going on in the world we're experiencing, but also something going on in our brain to cause happiness, right? It's important to know we are designed by evolution to experience temporary happiness, like all organisms, right? If you ate that donut and then felt pleasure all day long and didn't want to do anything else, then that would not be a good thing, right? You probably neglect yourself, your children, you wouldn't search for food, and you'd end up at, out of the gene pool, right? It's also important to know we are designed to experience unpleasantness, and I'll try to get to that in a bit too. Okay. And just going back, I don't have a good slide for pleasure centers in the brain or pathways because we don't know what they are. In both of these networks, there's an opiate receptor. Even in the stress network, there's opiate receptors and enkephalin, endorphin receptors. So, and then there's the issue of wanting more happiness, which communicates with both. I think sometimes it's funny, like, so I have a sweet tooth, and sometimes if I'm hungry and I see a box of donuts, I'll probably eat more than I want to. And my frontal cortex, the focus network, will tell, I can hear it saying, hey, you probably don't want to do this. And then I know my more basic part of my brain's like, shut up. It doesn't, we're going to deal with this now and not deal with it in the future. That argument is going on in my brain, and I'm actually privy to it. So it's a lot more complex than we know, and we may never truly understand it. Okay. So what about our own happiness? Where does it come from? So twin studies of separated twins, generally about half of it is just biology. You're just kind of set. And you can see that in like babies. You can see their disposition kind of come out when they're toddlers. But that's just always just going to be there. 40% is just things that happen in the day, right? Your sports team wins or loses, or, something good happens at work or doesn't. You get good grades, that sort of thing. And that's life. So basically 40% is life. The remainder is the important thing. And that's what we're going to try to address. And that's meaning and values and family, right? So going back to talking about money and health, study after study has shown that people in tight-knit, supportive communities and families are much happier than people who are in dysfunctional families, regardless of education, regardless of income, regardless of health, of chronic health, right? And everyone makes fun of marriage, but like study after study shows that people who are in good marriages, it's highly correlated with high subjective well-being, and the inverse is true. Poor marriages are correlated with poor self well-being, right? So someone who is very rich, very healthy, but kind of alienated socially, like you can think of, Bruce Wayne or Batman, that kind, will actually be a lot less happy than someone who is poorer, has poor health, but has a very supportive family and strong family, right? So this is a logical part of this. So we have to start refocusing on what we're looking for if we want happiness, right? So this is why this is important. And this is where we can start developing, we can start getting ourselves on this side of the resilience bubble, right? So what exactly are the values and virtues? We were talking about that. So these are the ones, and we're going to talk briefly about gratitude and meaning in this talk. So gratitude, and this is actually another Roman philosopher, Cicero, is not only the greatest of virtue, but the parent of all others, right? So to be a virtuous person, you first have to be grateful, right? So how can we practice that? How can we put this into our life? So this person is waking up, and immediately her mind is going to things she has to do in the day. There's some relationship issue, something going on at work, right? Not a great way to start the day. You're already starting with your stressors. A better way is to start with gratitude. So an easy way is to envision 5 people in your life who you're grateful for. So we'll take 20 seconds and do that right now. It's just a great exercise. So close your eyes, everyone. Envision 1 person in your life who you're grateful for. And another, and 1 more person. Then open your eyes, and you're immediately 180 degrees away from those things in your life which won't matter in a day or two, and you're with those that will probably matter until the day you die. Just logically a better way to start the day, right? And I don't know how many of you remember what your carpet or floor feels like, but engage your senses, right? Take a second and just feel around you. And then I always ask this question, and no one can remember, but I ask, does anyone remember the act of brushing their teeth last Wednesday? And no one can, right? It was not a new experience. It wasn't particularly pleasurable, and it wasn't dangerous, right? So it became a mindless task. There was a neat study where they had people think of 3 things that made them happy while brushing their teeth. In the course of a month, their PHQ-9 and GAD-7, which are scores for depression, anxiety, clinically and significantly dropped just doing that. So inserting that little positivity in your daily routine can actually have a significant influence on your overall mood. So these are all habits, and habits you need practice, right? So you can put a sticky in your bathroom and say 3 positive things or 3 things you're grateful for, or a sticky or a picture at your bedside to remind you to do this activity, right? And then it's extra credit. Show your gratitude. If you're feeling grateful, show it, right? You'll actually enhance your own well-being by doing so, but it's also going to strengthen your own relationships in life. So meaning, so this is an odd picture, I know, but so this is a butter and honey sandwich. Once my daughter, who's 5, I have 2 sons who are beasts, and my daughter is a twig. So we're always kind of worried about her kind of getting hurt or getting sick or something, right? So I had to start making lunch for her when preschool resumed this year. And at first, I have a lot to do in the mornings, and this was a chore. But as I was making her lunch, I actually, and this was the only thing she seemed to like, I actually started thinking about like the cholesterol and butter in the butter, and her phospholipid membranes and her neurons and the myelin sheets, and thinking about her growing and this food nourishing that. And it actually gave me a lot of meaning to start making her lunch, right? And it actually became a task that I looked forward to doing because it made me feel so good, right? It made me feel like I was nurturing her. We have a lot of mundane tasks that we do throughout the day. These are times when we can actually find meaning in things, right? A lot of the things that we just have to do, maybe with drudgery, they could be helping us be clean and keep our families healthy, ourselves healthy, our communities healthy, recycling, those things. These are all times when we can insert happiness in there. And I think it's important for us, especially in medicine, because there's a lot of stuff that contributes to our burnout, and a lot of it is practicing at a level in our license that we don't necessarily feel is at the top. And some of those tasks can become feeling like chores, right? Like drudge work. I'll give you an example. Actually, Lily May, who's one of our great chiefs, we're just talking this weekend about how she was doing a prior auth, which she doesn't like doing, like no one likes doing, for a medication, but the patient, no one had done it for them, and they could not get their diabetes medication. And when she did it, the patient was jumping up and down, thankful for it, right? It's nice when you have appreciation shown, but you can also think about like some of these even mundane tasks where you're really helping to do something for a patient, for their health, right? There's a lot that we need to fix in healthcare. So I'm not saying like this, I'm not condoning that stuff, but we can change how we react to it, right? So that's one of the things we can do. How else can we cultivate meaning? Well, probably the one of the best ways and the easiest ways is to focus on our relationships, right? On our family. So for a lot of us, this might be our interactions these days, right? And I've seen people like this if you're walking around, right? And I've had it too. Sometimes I regret growing up when I was a kid, and I'd come home, and instead of being grateful to see my parents, I was like right into video games or something more mindless, right? But that's not a good way to cultivate meaning. Instead, we want interactions like this, right? And how do we do that? Well, so one way we can do that is to view our loved ones, our friends, as new, right? Like this dog who's seeing her owner after a long time. That we're drawn to like that new car smell, but that's totally subjective, right? You can find interesting things about even the people around you who in your life who've been there for a long time, right? The other quality is transience, which I think is extremely important because we're on this earth for a very limited time, and we're on it with our fellow people for even less time. And I'll give an example. When I was doing my fellowship training in Minnesota, my family is in New Jersey, and I would fly and see them maybe 10 days a year. My parents were in their 60s. And when I actually did the math, say they had 30 years left, and I see them 10 days a year, I have maybe like 300 days left with my parents. And that really was striking to me. And I used to come home and just, eat dinner with them. Thanks, mom, dad. And then off to my room or off to see my friends from high school. And then I realized like I couldn't do that. I needed to be mindfully present with them. I didn't want to wait till they were on their deathbed to say, oh, I wish I had spent more time with them, right? So when I come home, I turn off my devices, no email. I'm just mindfully present with them, right? Regardless of what we have to do. Okay. So I really want to get the point that across to that, and this takes reflection, but our happiness to things is extremely transient, right? I can't think of anything that I've ever had that I was looking forward to that I got that made me happy for more than a few days. Most things, it's like a few hours and we kind of move on. We're so used to getting things, right? So it doesn't make sense to really put our focus on that. Um, Happiness to people is far easier to obtain and far more, long lasting. I can tell you, I just get so much pleasure out of even just coming to work. And my colleagues, I just love being around them, spending time with them, residents, med students. I just get energy. It's just such a source of joy for me that I've started to prioritize that. And that's what we should think about if that makes you happy as well, right? We're a social species. We are designed to be happy, and respond to other people, right? Um, you have to remember this can wane too if we take it for granted. So especially with your loved one, if you have a partner or children or parents, it's easy to take them for granted, right? So practice the gratitude, practice thinking about transients to kind of keep your connection with them fresh, right? Okay. These are some hacks that you can do. Some of these are evidence-based. So sociologists have been studying a lot of this. So one of the things they found is that sacrifice actually makes people happier, right? So when people are sacrificing for Lent or Ramadan, they actually are a lot happier, even though it seems like, oh my God, that's so difficult, 40 days or a month. But people are actually happier, right? Uh, so who do you guys think is happier, like this group of bachelor dudes partying or this father who clearly looks like he's sleep deprived but taking care of his child? So the answer is actually the fathers, and in studies, it's like almost their happiness is rated like double, right? And I would say a lot of that is because of sacrifice, right? Of putting someone or something else above them. There's that concept of a helper's high when we feel good, when we help someone and we feel that they've been helped, right? So just engage in that. And if you do sacrifice, if you do practice Ramadan or Lent, you can make a small sacrifice once a week, once a month, like give up meat, give up a device. It may actually make you a little bit happy. Um, this is important too, especially for residents whose time is limited. You might have I know that like a weekend off may be very rare for you. You may want to cram and like, oh, we got to do like 6 things this weekend. Pick one or two things and do them well. If you try to do a lot of things at one time, you're probably not going to enjoy any of them, right? So focus on a few things at a time. This could probably be a whole half a lecture on itself, but strategies to minimize worrying. So worrying in itself and ruminative thinking is actually very illogical, right? Because it doesn't accomplish it. No one's ever saying, man, I'm glad I worried all weekend. No one's ever said that, but we do it every, that worry will come and we'll entertain it, right? So writing things down, writing tasks down, trying to reflect on what it is that's bothering you. These things can actually be an investment in your quality time later on. And then minimizing devices. So this I can't stress enough because devices are great tools. They really help us, especially at work. We can do a lot more, but they've just been around for a few years now, a couple of decades, and we never really knew how to use them. And we get a little dopamine fix every time we see something entertaining on them, and a lot of times I've been at the elevator waiting, and I just see my hand creeping into my pocket, right, looking for my phone, and I started to ask myself, like, why am I doing this? I just need that little. I was unable to sit there with my thoughts just for a few seconds, right? So just become aware of it and see those times that you're using your device, not as a tool, but as something to entertain you or to take you away, to distract you, right? Because that's not what we want. That's not going to cultivate happiness, right? The device is a default network. Going back to that, that's in your hand now. It's another part of your brain that's sitting out there. but it's not the part of the brain that you really want to develop, right? We want that the focus network, the frontal cortex. This isn't totally belong in a happiness talk, but because of Grand Rounds, I'm just going to tell you guys, because I probably won't get this huge audience, an audience like this in the future. But to avoid negative thinking, remember, this was actually from one of my mentors who said this: people don't care about what you think about yourself, the small blemishes, or you acted a certain way or said something stupid. Everyone is focused on themselves, right? What they care about is how you make them feel about themselves, right? So if you're positive and you make them feel good, they will like you. If you're negative and you're critical, they will start to want a distance from you. That is what you should care about, not about how you are coming across, because people are preoccupied with themselves. Everyone is thinking about themselves, right? So don't let that be a source of negativity. Avoiding negative thoughts, especially judgment. There's so much negativity in the world today, especially with news. My recommendation is to really limit your news unless you need something very strategic or important from it, because it's just become a source of negativity. And I can tell with my patients and myself, honestly, a lot of people are feeling depressed from it. So just avoid those things, right? I like to look at this picture because it really gives a sense of like, and this is a terrific picture. This is from the Cassini satellite. This is the rings of Saturn. This is Earth, that far away, right? We're just a speck in the universe. The things you thought about 3 days ago that you were angry about, or this person did this, or you had a pimple on your nose, that it doesn't mean anything, right? It's gone. We can't even remember those things that bothered us. So it doesn't make sense to either worry about those things or get mad about those things. It's just illogical. Going back to like the Stoic train of thought. And then ultimately you have to know yourself, know thyself, right? And this goes back to the ancient Greeks. But if you really want to achieve happiness, you really have to start thinking about those things in life that you really want to prioritize, right? So this may be something like, maybe if you're, after residency, later in your career, you have a house, and maybe you have a house that's not quite as nice as you like, and I want to have a huge big house in this place. Is that really going to make you happy? Is that, after a few months, are you just going to view it as your house, and then you're not going to like have that pleasure of going into every room and having all these nice neat things? Or might you find more pleasure taking that money and time and spending it on vacations or experiences with your loved ones and your friends? Those are the things that we talk about. I don't know anyone who like reflects on their childhood and talks about how like amazing their house was, but they talk about, going to Disneyland or the cool things they did in the summer with their parents. I mean, just think back on your life. Like, what were the things that were memorable? So focus and prioritize those things, right? And again, yeah, things, happiness of things is temporary. I'm not trying to make a moral judgment on material things. They're important and we do need them. So this is not saying like it's inherently bad. It just doesn't contribute to happiness the way that a lot of us think it does. I think there's a lot of confusion on that. That's the point I'm trying to make, right? Yeah, I'm not trying to be like a socialist and saying like, oh, don't try to have things, they're evil and bad. That's absolutely not what I'm saying. Just think about them in the context of your life and your happiness, right? And again, pursue connectedness and experience. I think it's really important to embrace unpleasantness. It's actually adaptive. I think society has gone to a point where we try to minimize it as much as possible or avoid it, and that's actually not healthy. They've found that they've studied this as well and found that people who like experiences like sadness actually can make people more productive. It can motivate them, work better. Um, when they ask people about negative emotions and negative experiences, they tend to be highly tied into things that have a lot of meaning, right? You need to put yourself out there and have a little bit of risk to live a full and rich life, right? If you try to avoid these things, you're not gonna you probably won't actualize your life to the extent that you want, right? So we need to stop just pursuing pleasant feelings and avoiding unpleasant ones. This is like a very high level, almost like Buddhist thing, but becoming indifferent to the cycle of happiness and unhappiness, because that's what happens essentially. Some days are good, some days, even within a day, you may experience happiness. I think in a way that we can make things better. I work Monday through Friday, and on Fridays, I'm extremely excited and happy about Friday and the weekend. And then Monday comes, and I'm like, man, Monday. And my Sunday night is like, Monday's coming, right? And I started to try to think and say, I'm going to try to treat every day as very similar. That way, I won't have the high of Friday, but I won't necessarily feel as down as I will on Sunday night that Monday is coming. So I think that's kind of what the hack is, to see those things that can cycle through. I think sports is another one. When you get really into your sports team and they win, you feel great, and then when they lose, you feel devastated, right? If you're that much a sports fan. So that stuff needs to be leveled out a little bit. So that's what you can do if you think about it. And that's what that picture is. Sometimes if you stop pursuing happiness, it'll kind of just come to you, right? And I'll give you a little bit of a way to deal with that too. So so if you are feeling sad or anxious or angry, I think for a lot of us, we try to avoid these feelings, or we try to pursue pleasant ones right away, right? And I think that's what happens with emotional eating, or even going to devices or unhealthy behavior, right? There's something in us that's not quite working right. It's okay to feel sad, grumpy, anxious. This is a Grumpy Monkey. It's actually a really good book. I don't know if you guys, a children's book, if you read it, but this monkey was just feeling grumpy, and everyone in the jungle was trying to cheer him up, and it just made him worse. And then one of his friends says, I think you just need to be grumpy. And he realized that too, and he actually started feeling better. But I think there's a lot of truth in that. I think sometimes we just need to identify our emotional state and say it's okay, right? Or say like, okay, I'm sad right now, and I need to just be sad, and I'll be fine in a little bit. You don't have to go and find that box of sweets or start doing unhealthy things, right? And then also, don't ever give yourself advice as if you're giving to a friend. Don't follow your own advice to yourself, because we are psychopaths, right? Especially doctors, for type A our whole lives, and expect the highest, for ourselves, and are totally always taught that like our grades and performance is like how we achieve happiness. If you're feeling down, do what you would offer a friend to do. Be compassionate of yourself. Take care of yourself. Take some time off to deal with things, right? Okay. I think there might be a few minutes for questions here, but that's the talk. I'll leave this quote. This was actually my mentor, Dr. Ahmad Sood. And if you guys have any questions or comments, happy to answer them.